The workshop hummed with quiet rhythm, the kind that settled deep into the bones. Sparks flared and faded in the low light, casting blue-white shadows across shelves crowded with worn-out tools and forgotten parts. The air smelled of heated metal and ozone tinged with the sharp bite of coolant. It was a familiar scent, comforting in its own way. Kale Thorne stood hunched over his bench, his calloused fingers deftly guiding a microplasma welder across the fractured casing of a drone. Stabilizer. He worked without hurry. There was no clock in here, only the unspoken understanding that everything broken would eventually find its shape again. 20 years in the Corps had made him many things. A fixer, a survivor, a man who understood the language of machines better than people. Out here on the edge of civilized space, silence was a kind of currency. Kale spent it wisely. No small talk. No questions. Just the steady hum of effort. He wiped his hands on a cloth dark with grease and age, setting the repaired drone aside when the workshop door hissed open behind him. Cold air slipped in first, curling around his ankles, sharp and clean like the void outside. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Only one person made the temperature drop like that. Vexera stepped inside. Her presence filled the room. Long before her voice ever did. At over 7 feet tall, she was an imposing figure of alien elegance and power pale blue skin catching the overhead lights like polished stone. Red curls tied back from a face that rarely showed emotion. She was Kethmore, last of a warrior sisterhood whose name still made hardened captains fall quiet. She never spoke when she came here. She didn't need to. Her armor spoke for her, scratched, scorched, sometimes cracked down the chest plate like a shattered heart. Tonight, her armor was worse than usual. Kale turned just as she stepped forward, her movement slower than he remembered. Her boots barely made a sound on the floor, but her presence was heavy, like gravity had wrapped itself tighter around her shoulders. In her arms, she carried parts of her suit-blackened leg plates, a scorched gauntlet, the dented front chest piece with the Kethmore emblem nearly worn away. She laid them on the workbench, one at a time, with a kind of reverence Kale hadn't seen before. Her hands lingered over the metal, fingers brushing the edges like she didn't want to let go. She didn't speak. She never did. Kale nodded once and moved toward the damaged leg armor, grabbing his tools with practiced ease. He knelt beside the bench, his fingers working quickly. The servo joint had ceased from overload, hydraulics dry as bone. He lost himself in the rhythm, in the soft hiss of calibrators and the faint tick of diagnostic probes. But something wasn't right. Her breathing, it wasn't even. Not like before. He didn't look at her, but he could feel the shift in the air. Her hands were trembling. Her breath came in short, shallow pulls, like she was holding something back and failing. Then, without warning, it happened. A single tear fell from her cheek, silent as snowfall, landing on the back of his hand. The droplet shimmered like liquid light, warm and real. He froze, tools in hand, staring down at it as if it were something impossible. That tear burned into him, not with heat, but with weight, the raw emotion it carried piercing deeper than any plasma torch could. He looked up and she was watching him. For the first time, their eyes met and held. Her amber gaze, usually sharp and unreadable, was fractured like glass spidered by an unseen impact. The silence between them changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of everything she hadn't said, everything he hadn't dared ask. Neither of them spoke. Didn't need to. The tear hadn't just fallen, it had shattered something. Not just between them, but inside her, and inside him. Kale didn't wipe it away. He let the warmth of it sink into his skin, a reminder that the impenetrable warrior before him was made of flesh and grief, not steel and myth. Vexera didn't flinch when their eyes locked. She stood there, unblinking, her shoulders drawn tight like cables under strain. Her lips parted slightly, as if caught between regret and confession. Kale didn't speak. He didn't reach for her. He simply set his tools down, one by one, the clinking metal strangely loud in the hush between them. Then she moved not away, but forward. Past the rows of rusted parts and stacks of half-finished repairs, past the air thick with oil and tension. She crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps and lowered herself onto the same stool she'd occupied a dozen times before. But tonight, she didn't sit like a silent statue watching him work. She sat like someone folding under invisible weight. Her back curved slightly. Her hands rested in her lap. Her fingers were shaking. For a moment, Kale considered saying something, anything. But what did you say to a legend when they started to come undone? Instead, he leaned on the bench beside her, close but not touching, and let the silence stretch. Not awkward, but waiting. I couldn't save them, she said finally, her voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. Her accent, always precise and sharp like the edges of a blade, had softened, worn down by grief and exhaustion. She didn't. Look at him as she spoke. Her eyes were fixed on the far wall, as if her memories were etched into the bulkhead itself. They called me blood rot, she said. That was the name they sang when I charged into battle, the name they carved into our warships, the name the enemy feared. Her lips twisted into something bitter. But names are nothing when your sisters die screaming for help you can't give. Kale didn't move. She took a deep breath that caught halfway through, trembling with effort. We were ambushed. 7 of us. Guardians of the last outer ring. We'd fought for centuries side by side. I saw their ships burn. I heard them calling my name. Her hand drifted instinctively to the cracked chest plate on the bench beside them. I brought back what I could. Kale looked at the armor differently now. Not just damaged tech, but relics, funerary remains of a family lost. Every night since, she whispered, I've seen it happen again. Their faces, the fire, the silence after. In the dark, I don't sleep, I wait. I wait to feel useful. Again, but I'm only useful in places like this. She gestured weakly around the workshop, with the smell of solder and the hiss of welders. It's the only place quiet enough for the screaming to stop. Kale turned slightly toward her, measuring the distance between them, not in feet, but in trust. You don't have to carry that alone, he said. Voice low, steady dot. She looked at him then. Really looked. Her amber eyes searched his face like a battlefield. She didn't speak, not for a long time. And when she did, her voice cracked not from weakness, but from the pain of honesty. Your people, they respect me. But they fear me more. I'm a weapon to them. Useful, dangerous. Never something to understand. Never someone to grieve. I'm not afraid of broken things, Kale said. I fix them. That's what I do. Something in her expression shifted barely. A flicker of something like hope or disbelief. Maybe both. I may be beyond repair, she said, voice almost too quiet to hear. He smiled gently. Let me be the judge of that. For the first time, she didn't look away. That night, Vexera didn't leave the workshop after the repairs were done. She stayed, not to watch, not to wait, just to be. They sat there as the hours passed, surrounded by the warmth of humming equipment and the quiet click of cooling metal, and when she finally stood to go, she turned at the door, not to speak, but to look back. Her eyes held something Kale had. Never seen in her before. Trust. It was small, fragile. But it was real. And it was just the beginning. The days that followed unfolded with a strange, quiet rhythm. Vexera returned to the workshop every evening, not in armor, not always with damaged tech, but with the same unspoken need that had drawn her there the night her tear broke the silence. She never asked for repairs now. Sometimes she just sat in the far corner, arms folded across her chest, eyes distant as if staring into a war only she could still hear. Other times she helped wordlessly lifting components, holding frames steady while Kale worked. And once she brought him a cooling unit scavenged from a derelict Kethmore cruiser, aged and elegant. He restored it. She said nothing, but when the fan whirred to life, she smiled, briefly. Then it vanished. Like starlight behind a storm cloud, Doc Kale never questioned her presence. He let it become routine, as constant as the hiss of arc welders and the scent of ion-scorched metal. But he noticed things. The way she always chose the same seat. The way her fingers traced the edges of her knee guard when lost in thought. The way her eyes lingered on his hands when he worked, watching not the tools, but him. Then came the night everything shifted again. The workshop lights flickered, then held steady as the emergency systems recalibrated from a power surge somewhere. In the aft reactor, Kale had just finished cleaning the microfilament coil on a hover stabilizer when the door slid open. Vexera entered silently, as always, but tonight something about her felt off. Her eyes were wild. Her hands, usually so precise, twitched. At her sides, she stepped in, looked around, and without a word, pulled a long shard of shattered alloy from the side of her leg. The wound beneath it oozed dark, shimmering blood barely clotted. Kale was on his feet in an instant. What the hell happened? She didn't answer. Not right away. She walked over to the bench and dropped the metal fragment with a clatter. Then braced herself on the table with both hands, breathing hard. I was followed, she said at last. Followed? Kale asked, moving beside her, trying to examine the wound without disturbing her balance. She nodded slowly. Someone's watching me, studying me, not just the enemy. Someone on this ship. Kale felt his chest tighten. Are you sure? She turned to him then, eyes glowing faintly. I'm not paranoid. Kethmore don't survive centuries of war by guessing. I was ambushed. Inside the training decks. No records, no alerts. Someone scrubbed the surveillance feed. Kale stepped back slightly, stunned. Someone tried to kill you. Here, she nodded once. But it wasn't to kill. It was to test. The room seemed colder. They knew my tactics, she said, voice low. They mimicked the formations my sisters used. They wanted to see how I'd react. How I'd fail. I think they want me broken, not dead, useless. She sank down slowly onto her stool, the same one as always, but now it felt like a throne made of coiled tension. Kale moved quickly, grabbing a medkit from under his bench. She didn't resist when he rolled up her pant leg, revealing the gash. Deep but not fatal. You should be in medbay, he muttered. I don't trust anyone else. The words hit him like a reactor pulse. He worked in silence for a few moments, applying the antiseptic, weaving the dermal stitcher across her skin with careful fingers. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. When he finished, he leaned back, meeting her gaze. This isn't just about the past anymore, is it? She shook her head. They're trying to erase us, she whispered. What the void couldn't finish, someone inside is trying to complete. Kale stared at her. But why? Her face tightened. Because I'm the last. And the last is always the most dangerous, because she remembers. She looked down at her hands, blood still on her knuckles. My sisters died with honor. I won't let that memory be silenced. Kale stood, his mind racing. This wasn't just grief now. This was something bigger, darker. Someone aboard Harmony's Edge wanted Vexera. Shattered wanted the last of the Kethmore broken from the inside. I'll help you, he said. She blinked. I don't just fix things, Vexera. I build them. I hide things. I rig things. You're not alone anymore. She reached up slowly and placed her hand over his chest. Her fingers spanned nearly the width of his ribcage, warm and steady. I'm not used to people choosing me. After they've seen the damage. He placed his hand on hers. I see the damage. I'm still here. And in that moment, under the low light and the hum of the cooling fan she brought him, something unspoken sparked between them an alliance. Deeper than duty. A trust that could not be bought or forced. They weren't just fixing armor anymore. They were preparing for war. Kale didn't sleep that night. Even after Vexera left the workshop with a wound on her leg sealed and her jaw clenched in unspoken fury, the chill she brought with her never left the room. It stayed in the corners, in the air vents, in the silent warning of the metal shard she dropped on his bench. He turned it over in his hands now, alone under the flickering overhead lights, tracing its edges with the same care he used on shattered drone cores. But this wasn't just wreckage. It was a message. And someone on this ship on Harmony's Edge had sent it. He should have gone to command, reported the attack. But something in Vexera's eyes kept him silent. Not fear, something deeper. A sense of betrayal so sharp it could cut through armor. If she didn't trust the chain of command, he wouldn't either. Not until he knew more. The next day, he moved differently. Eyes scanning, listening closer. There were whispers among the crew, murmurs of covert operations, unexplained drills, sudden disappearances from routine patrol rosters. And the word Kethmore came up once, too casually, in a conversation that ended the moment he walked into the corridor. Someone knew. Someone wanted him to know. That night, she didn't come. He sat in the workshop long after his shift ended, working a half-broken thermocoupler just for something to do with his hands. He kept glancing at the door, expecting it to hiss open, for the cold air to signal her arrival, but she never came by the time the ship's lights dimmed for artificial. Night cycle, Kale was pacing. His thoughts spun in loops, fury, worry, dread. Then the message came. A flicker of blue light across the data console, blinking in a rhythm that matched the emergency Kethmore distress code. Old, obscure, and unmistakable. He opened it. No text. Just an image, her armor. Not worn. Hung. On hooks in one of the auxiliary maintenance bays. The chest plate cracked. The leg guards splattered. And beside them, her insignia, removed as if she were already dead. He moved before thinking, grabbing. His tool belt and a compact diagnostic scanner, bypassing security locks with codes he wasn't supposed to know. The maintenance bay was 3 levels down, dark, unused. Forgotten. Just like someone wanted her to be. The door creaked open on old hinges. The light inside was low, red, emergency backup only. The air was cold. Too cold. Kale stepped inside, pulse thudding in his ears. Then he saw her, not on the hooks, not unconscious, not broken. Standing. Alive. Waiting. But not alone. 2 figures stood behind her, both in unmarked armor. Their visors were opaque, their weapons low but unmistakable. They didn't move. Vexera stepped forward, slow, controlled. Her face was unreadable, her body tense. Kale, she said, and even his name felt like a warning. I got your message, he replied carefully. I didn't send it. That hit like a thunderclap. The 2 soldiers behind her shifted slightly. Weapons not raised but ready. Kale's hand drifted to his belt, where he kept a voltage pulse tool. It wouldn't do much, but it might buy him 2 seconds. Then Vexera moved, fast, blinding. In one motion. She turned and struck one soldier in the throat, sending him reeling. The other lunged, and Kale didn't think he moved, swinging the voltage tool into the attacker's helmet. Sparks erupted. The man crumpled. Then it was quiet again, except for their breathing. Vexera stood over the downed soldiers, chest heaving. Her fists clenched so tight, her knuckles were nearly white. They were waiting for you, she said, not turning. This wasn't a warning. It was bait. You knew? She nodded once. I followed the signal. They've been using Kethmore tech. Old codes, my codes. Kale stepped closer, heart still pounding. Then who are they working for? She looked at him now. Not just angry, terrified, not the enemy. Then who? She didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, she reached into one of the fallen attacker's chest armor and pulled free. Data core. She handed it to him with shaking hands. Check this, but not here, not on this ship. Kale took it, already planning how to mask the trace, how to hide their steps. You're not safe here, he said. Neither are you. She hesitated, then reached up and pulled something from her collar. A chain. On it hung a small pendant Kethmore metal shaped like a fang. She pressed it into his palm. If they take me, don't let them bury the truth. And just like that, she vanished into the shadows. He didn't sleep that night either, but now it wasn't worry that kept him awake, it was war. The workshop was cloaked in shadows, the dim amber glow of repair lamps casting long silhouettes across the scattered tools and battered armor pieces. Outside, the hum of the Harmony's edge pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. Inside, time seemed suspended between moments of fragile calm and the weight of unspoken fears. Vexera entered quietly, unarmored for the first time in weeks, her red curls tumbling loose around her shoulders like a wild flame defying the darkness. Absence of her battlesuit revealed not vulnerability but a raw, unfiltered presence. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly beneath the low light, and her luminous amber eyes held a tempest of emotions: fear, anger, sorrow, and a fierce determination that refused to be quelled. She carried a small crystalline device in one hand, its facets catching the light and scattering shards of color across the walls. Without a word, she placed it on the workbench and activated it. A haunting melody filled the air, ethereal, distant, like the echoes of stars long gone but never forgotten. Kale paused his work, his hands stilling as the ancient music washed over them. The notes wove through the space between them, bridging worlds, memories, and pain. He watched her close her eyes, her body swaying subtly to the rhythm, as if the melody was a balm for wounds deeper than any physical scar. When the music faded into silence, Vexera opened her eyes and extended her hand toward him, fingers slender but strong, inviting. Kale hesitated only a moment before taking her hand, marveling at the contrast between their sizes, his smaller human fingers fitting perfectly between hers. It was a gesture fraught with unspoken trust. She pulled him close, guiding his movements. As she led him into the ancient dance of her people, a ritual once shared among her sisters after victories and losses, a sacred communion of souls through synchronized movement. Their bodies moved tentatively at first, awkward and unfamiliar, but gradually finding harmony. Each step was a conversation, each turn a promise. The dance unfolded like a fragile thread weaving their fractured lives together. Kale felt the weight of her pain and the spark of hope entwined in every gesture. As their bodies moved in silent accord, barriers dissolved, and vulnerability blossomed into connection. Then, without breaking their rhythm, she cupped his face with both hands, her touch reverent and trembling. Her breath, warm and steady, brushed against his skin as she whispered his name. Kale, like a prayer carried on the winds of distant galaxies. He responded by rising onto his toes, meeting her halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that was at once gentle and desperate, a mingling of mourning and yearning. The taste of starlight and promise filled the space between them, igniting a fire that thawed frozen scars. Their dance slowed, becoming less about movement and more about surrender. Each touch was a question, each response an answer, a dialogue deeper than words. As they moved toward the small cot tucked in the corner of the workshop, their bodies intertwined in a seamless embrace. In the quiet sanctuary surrounded by tools of repair and echoes of the past, they found something new wholeness born from broken pieces, a fragile hope kindled by shared pain and courage. Hours passed in tender exploration, the boundaries between warrior and technician dissolving into a shared heartbeat. They traced scars and whispered stories, their lovemaking a healing storm that shattered the silence of solitude. When dawn's first light filtered through the porthole, Kale awoke to find Vexera watching him, her fingers tracing gentle patterns on his chest. Her amber eyes shone with a quiet affection that spoke of battles fought and futures dreamed. "Good morning, my star meaner," she said softly. "Good morning, my warrior," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. For the first time in years, sleep had been a refuge, not a battleground. And in that fragile dawn, they both understood. Healing was no longer a solitary journey, but a path they would walk together. 3 months had passed since the night Vexera and Kale's worlds truly collided, not in fire, not in steel, but in silence, breath, and touch. The workshop had changed since then, in subtle ways. The mess was still there, the scent of scorched metal and heated flux still clung to the walls, but something new lingered in the air. Something warmer, a softness between the shadows. Their routine became more than routine. Each evening, Vexera returned not with broken armor, but with small gifts, fragments of her past, pieces of who she had been before the war stripped her. Soul raw. One night, she brought him a threadbare banner, scorched and folded tight. It bore the insignia of the Kethmore Sisterhood, stitched in gold thread that shimmered like sunlight on water. She placed it gently on the wall above his workbench. Her hands reverent. Another night, she shared a tradition, a ritual of remembrance, performed in silence, with nothing more than the lighting of a single blue flame. She explained it marked the presence of a fallen sister. Kale lit one with her. They sat together in that blue glow, saying nothing, just remembering. Yet even as their bond deepened, something darker loomed in the quiet corners of their lives. The attackers in the maintenance bay hadn't resurfaced, but Kale had traced. The data core Vexera handed him. He ran its code through 7 layers of encrypted barriers, bypassing systems buried under decades of joint operations firewalls. What he found wasn't a log or even a coms trace. It was a list. A name. Vexera classified as phased asset. Observe. Stress test. Terminate if unstable. There were other names on that list. All alien. All flagged with cold clinical directives. And most of them were already dead. Kale hadn't told her. Not yet. Not because he wanted to protect her, but because he didn't know how to say it, how to explain that someone inside the same command she once bled for now saw her as nothing more than a ticking weapon. A liability. He knew the truth would come out eventually. He just wanted her to have a little more peace first, but the peace was already cracking. That night, Vexera came to the workshop in silence, her expression unreadable, her movements slower, heavier. "I had the dream again," she said, sitting without being asked. Kale set down the calibrator and turned toward her. "The same one?" She nodded. "But this time, it ended differently." He waited, letting her speak in her own time. "In the dream, the ship still burn, the screams still come, but I'm not alone. You're there. And instead of calling for help, my sisters, they look at you. As if you were the answer." Kale swallowed, unsure of what to say. "Am I replacing them?" she asked suddenly, her voice a whisper wrapped in guilt. "Is that what this is?" "No," he said immediately. "You're remembering them. Through living, through love. Not erasing them." She looked at him, eyes shining. "I used to think healing meant going backward, fixing what broke. But maybe Maybe it means building something new. Out of what's left. Kale reached beneath his bench and pulled out a small black box. He handed it to her without a word. Inside was a pendant 2 stars made of salvaged alloy, orbiting each other in a delicate spiral. The metals were from her sister's armor and the damaged cooling core she had gifted him weeks ago. She stared at it, breath caught. "You built this?" She whispered. "I tried to build us," he said. "You and me. The past and the future. Together." She pressed the pendant to her chest like a lifeline. "I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do," he said, stepping close. "Because you're still here. Because you fight not just for revenge anymore, but for peace, for memory, for us." Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't blink them away. Then she pulled a datapad from her coat, set it down between them. "Council offered me something," she said. "Something I wasn't ready to accept before, but now," Kale looked at the pad. His breath caught. "Joint reassignment. Kethmore Officer Vexera and Senior Technician Kale Thorne. Location, New Eden. Colony. Mission. Defense Force Training and Systems Engineering Deployment. Status. Approved, pending response. You want us to leave?" He asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I want us to build," she replied. "A place where no one has to hide. Where armor isn't the only protection we have. A life that doesn't erase what came before, but grows from it." Kale smiled, heart thundering. "I can't think of anything I'd rather do." They stood in the middle of the workshop, surrounded by the ghosts of their past and the sparks of their future. She wore the pendant now, a small piece of starlight against her chest. And when she leaned into him, holding his face in her battle-scarred hands, the kiss they shared tasted not of sorrow but of sunrise. The day they left Harmony's edge, the corridors felt unfamiliar not for the way they looked, but for the weight that had been lifted. The warship, with its metal bones and flickering lights, had been home to years of quiet pain. It had been the site of broken armor, shattered memories, and the long silence between grieving hearts. But now, Kale and Vexera walked side by side, not as the silent technician and the feared warrior, but as something far more dangerous. As survivors. As builders. She wore her dress uniform, crisp and dark with silver trimming. The Kethmore insignia gleamed against her chest, but beside it hung the pendant Kale had made 2 stars circling one another. Bound by gravity, worn like a vow. Kale had packed light, just the essentials, a few custom tools, and a tablet containing schematics for New Eden's defense systems. But what he carried in his heart felt heavier than anything in his hands. The truth he had discovered from the data core, the classified directive to observe and terminate unstable non-human assets, still burned in his mind. He hadn't told her yet. He thought he might never have to. That leaving Harmony's edge behind would put the threat to rest. He was wrong. They arrived at the shuttle bay with 15 minutes to spare. Their departure had been cleared. Official. Sanitized. Too clean. Vexera knew it too. She said nothing, but her eyes scanned every corner. The predator inside her had not gone to sleep. It had simply fallen in love, and now it would kill to protect it. They boarded the shuttle. The ramp hissing closed behind them with a finality that felt more like a beginning. Kale took the co-pilot seat. Vexera stood for a long moment before, strapping in, as if memorizing the feel of leaving. As the shuttle detached and drifted from the hangar into open space, the viewport bloomed with stars. Vexera exhaled slowly. "I never thought I'd leave that ship alive," she said. "You didn't," Kale replied, without looking away. "The version of you that stepped on board years ago, she died with your sisters. But the one beside me now? She's something else entirely." She reached for his hand and held it tightly, but the moment shattered with a sharp electronic Chirp from the console. Kale frowned and opened the alert. Unauthorized. Transmission detected. Source: AFT console. Message intercepted. Playback available. His gut tightened. He tapped the file. A voice crackled to life, sterile, emotionless, filtered through encryption. Target en route to New Eden Colony. Phase 3 in progress. Confirm transition to live extraction protocol. Priority: silence the technician. Recover the asset. If stable. Terminate if not. Silence fell in the cockpit. Kale slowly turned to look at her. Her jaw clenched. Her breath hissed through her nose. "You knew," she said, low and dangerous. "I suspected," he replied, "after I saw the data. I thought if we left the ship, they followed us." Her hand moved, swift as lightning, hitting the manual. Override to disconnect the sub-transmitter hidden in the console's housing. Sparks burst and the signal died. But it wasn't enough. On the radar, 3 blips appeared. Small, fast, inbound. Kale stared at the screen. Interceptors. Weapons. "Hot," she said, standing. "They're not here to ask questions." She was already moving, opening the floor panel to access the shuttle's auxiliary systems. He followed, rerouting the ship's power to the stealth capacitors. Vexera jammed the comms array. Within 30 seconds, the shuttle went dark. They sat in shadow, drifting silently amid the stars, hiding behind the cold metal skin of their last hope. The interceptors swept past once, twice, then again, then. They turned. Retreating. Kale exhaled. But Vexera didn't move. "They'll be back," she said. "Next time, with more." "Then we don't wait." "What do you mean?" He pulled up the schematic on his tablet, showing her the New Eden Colony. Its defense network only half complete. Its perimeter shield still theoretical. "I say we finish what they were afraid of us starting," he said. "We build the shield, the fleet, the future." She stared at the map, the flickering outlines of an unfinished world. Then she looked at him. "Together?" He nodded. "Always." She touched her insignia, then the pendant, then let them come. They reached New Eden by silent drift, bypassing secure channels and landing undetected. The planet was still raw mountains half carved, towers half assembled, walls still rising like the bones of some ancient giant stretching awake. And there, beneath the light of a pale blue sky, they began again. Vexera trained the colonists in Kethmore tactics, rewriting the art of survival in a language they could understand. Kale rewired the colony's defenses from the ground up, embedding secret fail-safes and traps the enemy would never see coming. Together, they turned silence into strategy. Together, they turned pain into purpose. Together, they built not just a colony but a legacy. Word spread, quiet but fast, whispers of the warrior who couldn't be broken, the human who made the broken whole. They never returned to Harmony's edge, but the war followed them anyway, and this time they would be ready. Because love, like war, requires sacrifice. But unlike war, love rebuilds what it breaks.